welcome back to the Practice Makes Faithful podcast. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Ben, and today I'm joined by our lead minister at Grace Chapel, Paul Hugebart.
Good day to all of you. It is good morning for us. That's why I had to stumble on the good. I was trying to be very Australian this morning and say good day, but no.
That's great.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
And we're also joined once again by our discipleship minister, Rob Shaver.
It is good to be here, and it's good to have been here. So I appreciate you guys inviting me the last several weeks and getting to kind of flesh out, because you work so hard on lessons to get to preach in front of a congregation, and just to have that extra time, I guess, to get more mileage out of the work, through the podcast. But then also it's just been really great to discuss and to go deeper and chew on some things, and you guys bring up and have questions that are things that maybe I didn't think about, and so that helps me on a personal level. So it's not just here's a lesson that I put together, which that rarely is, but it's good to be here. Appreciate it.
Awesome, yeah, man. We have loved having you here for this series, because we've been in this series called Back on Track that Rob's been leading us through for this whole month of February. If you're just tuning in for the first time, you might want to go back and check out those previous messages. This has been a series on discipleship based on the book of 1 Corinthians, and we have really appreciated the messages that you've led and just some of these conversations that we've had out of this. I think we've had some really, really beneficial stuff, so thank you. Thanks for being with us. So, Rob, as we get going, would you just give us just a quick snapshot of where we've been in this series leading up to this point, and on what the Apostle Paul has been trying to tell the Christians in Corinth.
All right, we could make a tongue twister.
Christians in Corinth.
Christians in Corinth.
There's a lot of richness in the text, in the letter, in the 1 Corinthian letter, and so much that does deal with discipleship. But maybe on the surface you wouldn't judge it that way. But when you start to go through and you just, so much of it comes up. I've kind of seen these first 4 chapters as almost being a large introduction to the text, and in it, where there are definitely issues that have come up that the Apostle Paul is addressing, things that seems like maybe he was having some kind of conversation with people, either they had come to him or they had written him letters, and then he's going to get into answering those specific things. But as to lay the foundation, he does so in a couple of ways, and a lot of it's making the appeal to, hey, remember when I was with you. Remember how things got started. And so much of the time, getting back on track means going back to the beginning, right? Like getting back to your roots, because things get started the right way, hopefully, and let's get back to that. And so Paul's making the appeal to, hey, remember how I acted when I was with you, the kind of how I did things, and imitate me, because I've been trying to imitate Christ. So you remember how I was and imitate me, and that's one level of that. But then remember how you were when you first kind of came to Christ, and remember, because it seems like they had maybe been discipled more by the world than by good Christian mentors or by whatever scriptures they may have had. So kind of getting them back on track in that way.
Yeah, I think that's really good, Rob, and I think in particular, it's so applicable to us today because we are at this place where certainly the world is discipling us more than we are being discipled by the church often. I think the Barna study that came out, I don't know, within maybe the last year, that talks about especially young people, the millennial generation, but a lot of us too that are in Gen X and even older, I think, spending so much time being influenced by digital media, consuming that online. And so for the millennial generation, they said, it was 20 hours roughly per week consuming podcasts, YouTube content, other things like that. And that even for millennial Christians, out of that 20 hours per week, they were consuming roughly 1 that might be Christian content. So they were being discipled at a 19-to-1 rate by the things in the world. So I think certainly what was written, Paul wrote to the Corinthian Christians, is very applicable to us today. I think as well too, love how you have shaped this series in a way to point out that really, yes, we could be tempted to read this first letter to the Corinthians as a letter in which Paul was just addressing all their problems. So you're divided. Boy, you're really blowing it on that. You've got some sexual immorality in your church that needs to be dealt with. You guys are really blowing it on that. Even when it comes to spiritual gifts, you guys are so goofed up. I don't even know what to say to you. Just figure this mess out. Get your understanding about marriage correct. I mean, all these different things that we could look at and be tempted to say, that's the focus of the letter, is here's this super messed up church, and Paul was just trying to fix their problems. But it's very plain in the way that you've kind of framed this to say, here are these instances where Paul slips in what looks like this one-off statement that makes it very plain this is about either glorifying God or making disciples, living in such a way that they will emulate him, which he's their discipler, but they're discipling others, supposed to be discipling others. And that those are more almost summary statements or explanation statements of why he wants them to come to this place. And so I'll say for me, this month, I have been reading this letter in a different way than I have previously. And it's been very helpful to see that this for Paul existed within the concept of the Corinthians being disciples who made disciples, but the right kind of disciples,
right,
instead of we got to use it again, right? The immoral fish disciples, and so, all right, so with that as kind of the context, tell us where we were this past Sunday. What was this Sunday's focus in a nutshell?
Yeah, this Sunday we kind of got into chapter 3, and in chapter 1 is where the Apostle Paul first brings up, hey, I've heard there's these divisions among you, and some people are saying, I follow Paul, I follow Apollos, I follow Cephas. And so he brings that back up, he rehashes that, and says, kind of reinforces like this kind of attitude from you, like this is why I'm saying, like, I can't really even talk to you the way I want to talk to you. Like you're these kind of statements let me know that you are immature, like, and you're worldly, because that's the way that the world talks. That's not the way that disciples of Christ talk. And so then in kind of a response to that is almost like, I can't believe, like, and here's the absurdity of even talking like that, and he just goes into just using him and Apollos, because he's like, we're on the same team, and it's like so ridiculous that you've got two people that are marching in the same direction and have the same aim and have the same purpose and are co-workers with one another. Like, we are so aligned in what we want you to do and who we want you to become, is that it's just ridiculous for somebody to say, well, I follow one of you, and somebody else to say, well, I follow the other, right? It's like it's almost laughable. And so that's kind of the base of Sunday's sermon. Now, this week was a little different, because not that we can't learn from that, and not that there aren't divisions in the church today, and that we can't kind of say, oh yeah, it's all about following Jesus, but really a little bit of a different application this time, and saying a little bit more like, when we put ourselves in that position of being the disciple maker, what so often happens, at least I know I do this, and I think it's pretty true for most of us who are in Christ, and start to feel the pressure to go evangelize and go make disciples, is this feeling of, I've got to do this all by myself. And so the underscoring idea here is, Paul says, I planted and Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. God made the things grow. God made you grow, and we know that inside. We know that inside. This was a really amazing Sunday, because Sunday evening we had five people from the youth group got baptized, right? And I got to talk to one of the dads before. Just kind of, that's what we know. Like, as much time and energy and effort and prayer that goes into trying, like, hoping that your child will come to that point where they make a decision to follow Jesus, at the end of the day, that it's God sparked something in them.
Right.
Like, so kind of that was a lot of what I wanted to get across this week was like, I don't have to do it alone, and you don't have to do it alone. Like we see Paul as this great, great evangelist, and God didn't say, Paul, go do it alone.
Right.
He gave him a task, and Paul went and he faithfully did that task, and that's something to admire and try to imitate. But he also gave Apollos a task, which was not the same as Paul's, but
Yep.
just as important. And there's probably, I mean, obviously, I think Paul keeps it to him and Apollos for the sake of the argument. He could probably keep going on and listing names, and in some places he does things like that.
Yeah.
So God uses all these people. He calls them to specific tasks to help people to kind of create, to plant and water and nurture. At the end of the day, God's going to make the increase, and that's the biggest thing is God's on the team, right? So God gives you a team to make disciples with, and he is the leader of that team, and he is the power of that team.
Love that. That's really good, Rob. Thanks for that summary there. And so I want to ask you a little bit more about kind of this idea of Paul planting and Apollos watering a little bit, and just, I guess, let me just read this directly from 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 6. Paul's saying, I planted the seed in your hearts, and Apollos watered it, but it was God who made it grow. It's not important who does the planting or who does the watering. What's important is that God makes the seed grow. The one who plants and the one who waters works together with the same purpose, and both will be rewarded for their own hard work. We are both God's workers, and you are God's field. You are God's building. So I want to talk a little bit more about that and just kind of dissect that a little bit.
Okay.
And see just, so what does that mean? Just break that down for us a little bit. What are we talking about? Paul planting, Apollos watering. What is that? What's that referring to? And then kind of when we put that in the larger light that Paul's saying here is that God is the one making it grow. What does that mean in relation to the work that they're doing? So just kind of break that down for us a little more.
So verse 9 ends with, you are God's field, God's building, and the building part doesn't make any sense in that context, right? Like somebody's planting, somebody's watering, God's making things grow, and you're a building, and so that's actually a bridge into. So he kind of makes that point about there's the planters and the waterers, and God makes everything grow, and ends that with, and you, if we've been doing this work on you, then who you have been in the equation is God's field. When he talks about you are God's building, that goes into the next couple of verses, and I'll read those. It says, I think I've got
Starting
those.
in verse 10.
Yeah, so because of God's grace in me, I have laid the foundation like an expert builder. Now others are building on it. So that would be Apollos and others, right? But whoever is building on this foundation must be very careful, for no one can lay any foundation other than the one we already have, Jesus Christ. Anyone who builds on that foundation may use a variety of materials, gold, silver, jewels, wood, hay, or straw, but on the judgment day, fire will reveal what kind of work each builder has done. The fire will show if a person's work has any value. If the work survives, that builder will receive a reward, but if the work is burned up, the builder will suffer great loss. The builder will be saved, but like someone barely escaping through a wall of flames. So that might add more confusion than explanation, but I think at least for maybe giving some clarity on the planting and the watering is kind of using the second analogy is, all right, here's this great building and seeing this group of Christians in Corinth as being that building. So Paul sees his work as I came in and I laid the foundation. Now, the thing about foundations, and probably why, Paul was on a mission, right? And he moved from place to place, and this is what he did. This was his task. He talks about how he was given a task, is to go to new places that hadn't heard the gospel and lay foundation, right? So once you've got a foundation laid, it's ridiculous to lay another foundation on top of that foundation, right? Like that work has been done. And so Paul doesn't really need to stick around and keep laying foundation. Once he's done that work, he can move on and find the new place. Or he was very in tune with God's Spirit, so wherever the Spirit was leading him to go, he would go and lay a foundation there. But part of the foundation laying, I think, was training people to correctly teach God's word. So you have other roles, people who are teachers and people who are evangelists, that kind of emerged within those settings, so they could kind of keep that going. And so that's, in the second analogy, a warning, like, hey, that foundation is a good, solid foundation. But you can still build you can use terrible, materials if you want to. And we see that, in churches today. There's a temptation to skimp on the materials, right? Like, we just want to get this thing up fast, and since I've got young kids, I think of like the Three Little Pigs. Like let's just get this. Like, I'm lazy, I don't want to do the work. Let's just get this house of straw or house of twigs, And but if that's where our role is, that we're building on top of somebody else's foundation, and it's a good foundation of Jesus Christ, which is the only foundation that really matters or that can last, then we need to make sure that we are using premium grade A product as we build on that, and because that's people's lives, and that's people's souls. So I don't know if that.
Then I guess, as mapping that onto the planting, watering imagery, I mean, I guess the laying the foundation is the equivalent of the planting of the seed. Same kind of idea of the Genesis, and then the actual building of the building would be akin to watering the seed.
Yeah.
Then Paul's saying, but it's God that makes it grow. Explain more about that.
Right. Well, and this again is probably something that we just know, because you can take one lesson. Let's say somebody they put together a dynamite, amazing lesson, and they teach that lesson to 100 people. Even though it's the same lesson, those 100 people are different, right? And so they're going to receive it in different ways, and they're going to respond in different ways. And I think that's that Holy Spirit, God factor of God working in our lives. And there's things that somebody can hear something over and over and over and over again, and just it never clicks. And then one day it clicks. Well, why? What is that factor? And it's and how can we explain it? And I think that's that God factor, and that can be tough for us as humans, because we would love everything to just be very, very mapped out for us, right? Okay, if you need a new person and you have this conversation, and you read them this, and this scripture, then they will become a Christian.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I just have to go through this. I just have to accomplish these steps, and they're good. And obviously, there's a personal factor in there, but there's a way that God works in the heart that none of us can do.
That's good.
Yet God calls us into partnership. God's design and his plan for making disciples is not that he's just going to divinely go through and touch people's hearts. He wants us to be transformed and go out and take on these different things. And for some people to go out and lay foundation, or, to plant the seeds, and some people to water them. And
it's really quite, I think, humbling for us, as we've seen ourselves as disciple makers, as planters, waterers, or that might be, but to realize that we're not the one that makes it grow. We're not the one that's going to cause that to happen.
Right.
But we can still be faithful to that call to plant, to water.
Yeah, I would say on the other side of it too, I think it really does take a lot of pressure off as well. I shared last night in my small group, as we were working through this passage, talking, just there are times where, as I'm looking for opportunities, I see an opportunity, and because I'm so concerned about having just the right words, I actually don't step into that opportunity, because I just don't find what I believe are just the right words, just the perfect. So I put all this responsibility upon myself for finding the perfect words to communicate something about God within the situation to a specific person. And so because I didn't find the perfect words, I did nothing. So, Colossians 4, I didn't make the most of every opportunity. I missed the opportunity entirely. But it was because I put too much on myself that I would be the catalyst, or that I could somehow make something grow, instead of I could respond faithfully to work that God is already doing. I love, and Rob has been spending time with our small group. I love what Rob said out of that as well, just this idea that if God hasn't been working too, then even if I had the perfect words, then what would it do?
Right.
And so it does. I think it both humbles us, because we realize there's only so much we can do, but it also takes off some of the pressure, I think, that so many of us feel in realizing I'm actually only called to one thing, and it's to respond faithfully to the work that God is already doing, not to come up with the perfect phrase, not to craft or manufacture the opportunity, which is, I think, what we often try to do in disciple making. We're looking to be the one who sets the stage for just the right opportunity, or for those of us who preach, and all three of us communicate at times. We put so much time and effort into crafting what we hope will be the right turn of a phrase, even, or something, and that will be the thing that moves people. I think even as I read back upon some of the preachers of old, whether it be let's say a Chesterton or a Stott, or even some of the guys before them, I think about one of the things that really has struck me, Martin Lloyd-Jones, same thing. Those guys spent so much time in prayer about the message they were going to preach, that God would work in the time when they were sharing the message. They spent a whole lot less time thinking about what's the perfect way to say it, and a whole lot more time begging God to be at work moving when they opened His Word.
Yeah.
It's just, it really is. It is different from, I think, the culture that we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
Where sometimes perfection, getting it just right, we put the emphasis on our ability, and instead of putting the emphasis on the working of God. And so I think there's so much in this passage that points us back to God's doing what He's doing. Let's join Him in what He's doing in a faithful response. So I appreciate that emphasis a whole lot. You talked yesterday as well, or yesterday for us again, you talked about disciple making as a team effort, and you've already touched on that just a little bit, but I think that is worth returning to as well, this idea that disciple making is a team effort. I think this is a very important idea for us for a number of reasons, but I'd like to hear why for you think that's so important, and maybe even then beyond that, how might we lean into teamwork as a part of our framework for disciple making within our current setting?
Yeah, so I mean, that's Paul in the text in chapter 3 uses the term co-workers. We're co-workers, and you get that sense of, okay, well, if you see a field and somebody's planting and somebody's watering and somebody's making things grow, then yeah, they're all working together to accomplish that goal. So what does that look like? And who am I working with? So I kind of looked at it in 4 levels. I think there's kind of like a family level, and that, for me, it is a family. It could just be a group of 2 or 3 or 4 friends. I think that are kind of on the same page and work together in that way. I think the next level, church-wise, would be small group, and then the church as a whole. And there could be sections in between there, ministries. Like we just mentioned, the youth group. The youth group is bigger than a small group, but smaller than the Grace Chapel for us. And so there's entities like that hopefully they're working as a team to accomplish something. We've got a group of seniors, the prime timers, and they're working as a team. So there's that level, and then there's a kingdom level in which, you might have a conversation with somebody and never see them again, and then they go on and they go off to some other place, or they move to a different part of the country or a different part of the world, and God is gonna put people in their life and have them encounter different things, so that they each time hopefully are getting a little closer to Him. So that's a beautiful thing, is to understand that the end product is not up to me. I don't even have the ability to accomplish that. But I have a task. And so that task could be either the spiritual gift or the ability that God has given me, or where God has put me, or the people that God puts in front of my life and puts in my life. And so then, based on those different things, I can kind of see different teams. Now, it's helpful to kind of have some understanding of what God has gifted you in, right? So, like, what is my task? If I know I can't do it all, then I kind of, especially, know the places where I'm deficient. So then I can look out into my teams and see, okay, here's where I'm deficient, but this person really excels in this, So maybe it's like just being empathetic, and like, hey, here this person's going through a hard time, and like I can read them Bible verses, but I can't give them a hug and listen to them complain. Like I'm terrible at that. So I'm going to try to connect them with somebody that I know is just so loving. And that person though, I know them, and they have said to me more than one occasion, they shy away from getting into Bible studies with people because they're so scared of questions that are going to be asked that they just don't know book, chapter, verse on, so it's like, well, we can work together now, so they can reach somebody, and if they get to that place where they're like, they want a Bible study, but I can't do it. Well, okay, call me, and they're like, they just need to cry on somebody's shoulder, and I can't do that. Like, I can call you. Okay, so naturally in families, I'm a huge, I guess, what do they call it? Like group theory type things. If we're all hanging out and I'm loud and goofing off and I'm making jokes, and somebody else is like, oh, those guys look fun, I think I'll go hang out with those guys. And we've got 5 or 6 guys, and I'm that loud making joke guy. If another loud making joke guy comes into our setting, there's going to be immediately conflict between he and I, right? It's just a natural thing, because I'm like, wait a minute, in this group, I'm the loud jokester.
That's your identity.
Like that's my role that I kind of play, and everybody kind of plays their role. So if you come in and you're trying to play that role, like now you're either going to bump me out. It's very hard to coexist as loud jokesters, or you're going to immediately see like, okay, they already have a guy for that here, and so maybe one of us has to adjust if the relationship is that.
I'm loving
important.
this example, by the way. Yeah.
That happens in families too. Right, so my first child is very good, very compliant. We can ask him to go do something, and he'll go do it. My second child grows up seeing that. She can't make her mark in the world if she's just like her older brother.
Yeah.
So you ask older brother, hey, can you go do this? Yeah, sure, I'll go do it. Ask younger sister, hey, can you do this? Why? Now she can stand out. Mm-hmm. Ask child number 3, hey, can you go do this? She'll just throw herself on the floor and scream. Right? Because asking why is not going to stand out, and going and doing it's not going to stand out. So if I can just scream about it, that'll make me stand out. So we naturally gravitate towards groups of people that are like us in some ways, but also where we can have a spot. And so when we get together in small groups at church, there's a process of group life, form, and then step number 2 is storm. So that's what you put a group together of people, and then the second part of it is storming, because everybody's trying to figure out their place. And so there's conflict of personalities, there's different goals, there's different ideas, and it's not until that storm kind of resides or calms down that the group can become kind of normalize and then actually perform. And that's small group theory in business world and psychological world, right? It's
It's a good little crash course.
It's not to take their observation. That's truth, right? Like that's wisdom,
right?
That we can gain from the world, and we see it. So I think in a church situation, a small group, same thing, but we see it from a completely different angle, And like Paul later on in 1 Corinthians 12, we'll talk about different spiritual gifts, and then compare the body of Christ to a human body. right? And like, okay, there's one person's a hand, and one person's a foot, and one person's an ear, and one person's an eye. Nobody can say that the other part isn't needed, because all of these different parts of the body have unique functions, but they all work in harmony to make some amazing things happen. And so that's the really long answer to, so I love the idea of looking at a small group as a disciple-making community, because there's things we're going to connect, and we're going to learn each other's strengths and weaknesses. We're going to learn each other's abilities and spiritual gifts. We're going to kind of figure out, we need to make this body move. And so who are the hands and the feet, and who are the eyes and the ears, and how can we do this together? And once you get to that place where you can really perform, then you can really go and do ministry together.
Yeah, man, I'd love that's really good. It's really good. I'd love you to flesh that out a little bit more, what that can look like as a small group, because I think that's different than the way a lot of us might think of small groups, or at least maybe we aspirationally think of it that way, but functionally I think that's different than the way some small groups operate, where it is more, it's more about community, it's more about maybe just building ourselves up, edification, which is all really great.
Yeah.
But sometimes the discipleship part can get left out of that picture.
Certainly.
So help us understand a little bit more, what could that actually look like?
And that's a huge big first step, I guess, is to change the target. Because if the target of the small group is like, we just want to have a place where people can get to know each other and be friendly, or we want existing Christians just to grow in their own relationship with each other and God, then you don't really, like, I feel like that limits the small group potential. And so there's groups that are going to be very happy going along that course. There's other groups that at a certain point are going to kind of reach their limit, their potential, and then start to lose the vision of what God is really wanting them to do. So I think that is a huge initial key, and in something like, I work with the small groups here at Grace Chapel.
For the sake of potential, real quick, you mean potential as it relates to the mission of God?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Just wanted to clarify that. So.
Yeah, because so with small groups at Grace Chapel, we've been trying to say, like, well, we feel like we've been doing a good job at the greatest commands, right? Love God with all of your heart, strength, mind, soul. Love your neighbor as yourself. Neighbors as kind of our community. So and our small groups do a really good job at that. But what if our small groups also embraced the Great Commission?
Yes.
So we also kind of felt this, together we can go out and make disciples and baptize them and teach them to obey all the things that Christ commanded. Like, what if, because again, because I can't do that all by myself, but what if we did that? What if we could do that together? So actually Jim, who also works at Grace Chapel, for those of you who are not Grace Chapel people that might be listening, and he shared something with me, and I can't remember all of the different terms that he used, but kind of looking at this kind of group evangelism type thing, or group disciple making, and you've got some people that are just really good at inviting, and I think he called them the takers, or so some people, that's okay, we've got this little community, and man, that's their thing. They're going to go out and they just have this knack. They can meet somebody at this store, they can meet somebody at the park, they can meet somebody that they're just hanging out with, or just see, like, they're waiting in line for something, and they can strike up conversation, and they can get it to a certain place, and say, hey, you know what? A group of my friends, we all meet at Ben's house, and we have this time where we read the Bible together, and we talk about life stuff, and would you be interested in that? And that person, they're just so good at inviting, and other people in your group are not. There might be somebody else in the group that would never ever do that, or never, they just don't make those connections. But that person might be really good at putting together discussion questions and Bible study things, and so they're going to come to the group kind of feeling like, yeah, this is my place. Like, I can really lead us in discussion. I can really facilitate this. Somebody else might be like, I can't meet somebody out, and I can't lead the Bible study, but I can bake a mean casserole. right? And so like you bring people and I will feed them. And so you start to see a synergy of kind of things happening and people working with one another. So now if you're that person that's like, oh, okay, well, I just met Paul at the grocery store and he was telling me about this group, and it's a little nerve-wracking to go, but I think I'll go. And you show up and there's people that are just, somebody else comes to you and they're like, hey, this is my house, like and welcome, I'm so glad you came. And then you eat that delicious casserole and you're having the good conversation, and then things lead, and the spiritual direction of the group is not overbearing but good and conversational, and and hopefully everybody working together is going to provide that good thing. The other piece of it is, if you really see yourself as a team, maybe all right, this person I just met, they probably won't accept an invitation to my small group Bible study, but maybe I can say that I'm having some people over for dinner and games, dinner and hanging out, whatever, like, come on over, like, it'd be great. I'd love for you to get to know some of these people. Then you start making your phone calls for the people that have committed to be like, yes, Rob, we will be on your team. We'll be on your disciple-making team. So that doesn't mean like, okay, well, we meet every Thursday at 6 p.m. and anything outside of that, we're going to be strangers. It means we're working together, and so those opportunities where it might be, anything. So like Paul's got some kids that play baseball. So maybe he's like, there's a couple of people that are really interested. Small group, will you guys come? Are there, in these next 3 or 4 baseball games, are there any that you can come and cheer my boys on and get to know some of the other parents in the stand? Because Lori's been having really good conversations with them, and it'd be great to say, oh, and here's Rob, or here's Mark, and they come to our small group. They come to our house on Sunday nights and whatever. And so you're using each other far beyond the group, but everybody's kind of got their spot. And when you've got that hopefully is making you excited about going to small group and being a part of that, right? Because they're like, I get to cook my casserole every week, or a different one, and I love this, because people that love that stuff love that stuff, and like, oh, I don't have to do everything, but I can go out and I can invite the world, and I love it, and my group loves me for it, because they're like, thank goodness Ben's inviting these people, because Lord knows I'm not, and so, I mean, that's the ideal picture, obviously, but
man, it's really helpful, Rob. And this one, that conversation is very personal and relevant in my life right now, because we've had several conversations outside of this. I'm a small group leader, and Paul, you're in that same position as well, and it's been a learning journey for me of how can my small group take on that role as being more disciple-making focused, of being disciple makers, and we're still working that out. We don't have it figured out at all. Yeah. But one step that we've just taken in that direction has been, each week one of the things we do together as a group is we take communion together in our group, and we spend a few minutes and we take communion. We spend a little bit of time in prayer, and then we go around our circle, and everyone kind of shares about if there's anyone in their world that they are trying to disciple, that they want to pray for. And we've got a couple people who are actively engaged in that, and they'll share stories of this is what I've been doing. This is how this has been going, working with this person. And we all know names. Everyone has a name that they're sharing each week of, hey, this is my person that I've been praying for. And then we pray over those names together. And it's just been a really cool thing of getting our group a little bit more disciple-making minded. Yeah. It's been a very simple step that's been helping us move in that direction. That's been really cool. So I've really appreciated your encouragement in that direction. I wonder, Paul, what's that looking like in your group? I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but as a group leader as well.
No, I mean, it's I'd say similar in our group in some sense. Now we don't do it quite that way, but we use the 3/3 or Discovery Bible Study method, and so we're sharing challenges and praises. And it's interesting when a challenge comes out, and the challenge is actually related. I mean, thinking about one guy presenting last night at our small group, his challenge that he presented was concern over the potential loss of an opportunity with a guy that he was hoping to reach and has been trying to reach, but wanting us to pray as a group that was not the case, that the opportunity was not lost, and that actually there would be another on-ramp for another conversation. And so, yeah, those things are definitely active and ongoing, and it does, even for me, I've got several guys that I'm trying to engage with or have been for a while, and to know that our small group, as we share those, either those names out or just, here's the setting in which I'm doing this, if it's not necessarily specific names, to know that other people are praying, boy, incredible encouragement. I think too, we read a study a number of years ago, and I can't remember exactly where it came from, so it's always dangerous to quote studies when you're not actually quoting the study, but talking about burnout and ministry, so for ministry leaders, but then also just particular leaders within a church, so just leaders within a church. So we're talking about staff, paid staff people, and volunteer leaders. And burnout came especially when a person felt like they were responsible for everything having to do with this particular ministry. So the small group leader, and I'm supposed to do it all. So I'm supposed to have the house, I'm supposed to be the inviter, I'm supposed to be the person that can lead the lesson, and maybe my wife has to be the one that can take care of all the food. And so here you are doing everything, and everybody's coming to you, and now small group is just another place where people come to consume, just at a different level.
Right.
As opposed to we're coming together. I love the way Mark Sayers talks about, a church moving to a place where they are really truly living in a healthy response to what God is calling us into. And he says that church will move from consuming the faith to contending for the faith. Well, we don't want to create another space for consuming. I mean, if that's what small groups turn out to be, that is actually not healthy. That you're not learning how to live together as a family. My kids in my house, I want for them to be active participants within our family, as opposed to just consumers of the things that we put in front of them. So we work hard, and we bring home the finances, we bring home the food, and we have this place for them to stay, and they're just freeloading everywhere they go, and we're not training them to become good young adults. The same is true in small groups. They ought to be places where training, equipping, teaching is taking place, so that it truly does become teamwork as we go. And so, again, it's not healthy when it's not, and it's not just for those who aren't being taught or trained or equipped. It's also not healthy for that one person who feels like all of this is on me. And again, it leads to burnout. I can't remember what the rate was, but that was the number one reason for burnout, I believe, was I feel like all of this is on my shoulders.
And there's no small task. Because I think my favorite small group member is the person who does the dishes. Like when we were hosting at our house, when I would walk through and I'd see somebody just at my sink doing all the dishes, I'd be like, I love you so much. I'm so glad you're part of this group, because I don't want to do that. I don't want Cassie to have to do that.
Awesome.
But I just wanted to throw something real quick. This goes along with the whole idea of teamwork and making disciples. But it is also when the small group changes their target, and they're like, we're no longer just here for each other, all right, and just here to make each other closer to Jesus. When we're here to serve together and we're here to make disciples together, then that will change how you see a lot of different things, right? And so one of those things is, all right, definitely, I think, Ben, what you mentioned is a great example. We can say, who are people in your life that aren't Christians yet we can be praying for? But second, every prayer request becomes an opportunity. Where it's not just, here's what we want you to do, but they say, okay, God, what do you want us to do? What do you want? How do you want us to respond to this prayer request? And just last month, there is one of the ladies in one of the groups that meets here at the church building brought a request. One of her friends had just tragedy in her life. Terrible child died. And so the women in the group got together, and they all wrote cards of encouragement and note cards with encouraging scriptures on them, and they put this whole package together to send this mother in mourning, and that's the next level, right? That's when those are the steps that I think are really incredible, because now it's like your group's not contained within itself. Now you're performing, right? You're in that stage where it's all right, this is who we are. This is what God wants us to be. When we hear that, your coworker is having a tough time because, her husband's been in the hospital for 6 weeks. Well, what can we do now? Can we bring her a meal? Can we, and you're thinking outside of your group to like, there's a reason that you are aware of this person's issues and problems, and how can we show them what Jesus looks like? And that's what discipleship and disciple making is all about, right? Showing other people, like, this is what it means to follow Jesus. And then they see that, so.
It's really good.
Yeah. Agreed.
That's awesome. So
You guys got me all excited.
I can tell. It's good.
Amazing. It's amazing. As we start to come to a close on this episode, we'll say it every week, and we'll say it again. The podcast is practice makes faithful. Mm-hmm. So how can we practice this? How can we practice this to be faithful to that mission? And even as we're kind of coming to a close on this series, what's as you're all hyped up right now, give us our marching orders as we move forward into this. How can we be faithful to this mission?
I don't have any. No. Well, one of the things that really struck me about 1 Corinthians 3 is that Paul talks about how that God has given each of them, Paul and Apollos, a task,
right.
and but that task, he then says, but has one purpose. And so, as a church, I think numero uno, as individuals that are a part of any church or small group or ministry or anything, is kind of to know what is the purpose of that thing that you're involved in. Mm-hmm. And it's got to be about bringing glory to God, and then it's got to be about us giving up our own lives and doing anything we can to help other people get closer to Jesus. And that's mm-hmm. Paul says, I make myself a slave to everybody so that I might win some, or so that I might save some. And so I'm kind of using his language and translating into get people closer to Jesus. Like, that is mm-hmm. why we exist. And so every ministry that we have, every small group that we have, every team that we have, every family in the church should know, like, my family exists to help other people get closer to Jesus. My small group exists to help other people get closer to Jesus. So that is a huge thing. Like, if you're in a group or part of a ministry that does not see that as its ultimate purpose, then that needs to shift. And if those things shift, I think just automatically some things will fall in place. But that's the back on track. Mm-hmm. That means your small group is off track, or that means your family's off track, or your ministry's off track, or your whole church is off track. That's the back on track. Glorify God, do everything you can to save people. All right, like, that's what it's all about. That's what Paul's writing to the Corinthians. So then, second to that, if that's what the purpose is, what's your task within that purpose? Because you can't do it. Like, you can't save those people. You can't do all the things that need to be done to save that person, but you can do whatever task God has given you. Now, some people balk at this. They get all tight, like, oh, I don't know what my gift is. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, or whatever it might be. Maybe you guys have some good advice for somebody that's in that situation. I think try. I think there's a lot of good resources out there. I mentioned in the class that I was teaching on Sunday the acronym SHAPE, which stands for spiritual gifts, heart, abilities, personality, and experiences. Mm-hmm. Kind of look at a grander picture of how has God shaped you for ministry. So it might not be just about a gift, but it might be that you've had several experiences in your life that are unique, yes, that now you can help other people going through those experiences. Mm-hmm. Or it might be your personality, that you love going out and talking to people, or you love just sitting home and reading your Bible. It might be like natural abilities that wouldn't be spiritual gifts, just things that you're really good at. Those are things that you could go out and teach somebody else, and then how can you infuse spirituality into those connections? So there's in the heart, what causes really, really get you. And I think we see, as in the last couple of years, where the world has put things in front of us and be like, here's a cause, you're supposed to care about this. There's people that are like, I'm not really that passionate about that cause. So what do I do? Like, do I have to be passionate about that cause? No, because there's a million causes out there. we can't be passionate about all of them. So there's a way that God has uniquely woven your heart together to make you. So take some time and consider that and kind of think like, all right, in this whole grand picture of helping people get closer to Jesus, how has God shaped me, or how is he shaping me so that I can fit that? And that's, I think, if you're in a vacuum, maybe harder to do. If you're in the context of a group or a family or a small group, then you can kind of say, okay, here's what we're doing together or in your ministry, and here's my place in this group.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah.
So I can see other people are doing these things. So you're either trying to find the thing that maybe you can do that nobody else is really doing, or that somebody else is doing well, and saying, I feel like what you're doing is really attractive to me. And I feel like I could do that same thing. Can you show me how to do what you're doing?
Yeah.
You know, be my mentor. Show me the way. And that person can be different than you. They can be younger than you. Who cares? God uses all of that stuff. So I'd say those would be the two things. Make sure that whatever you're a part of, that the ultimate purpose is glorifying God and getting people closer to Jesus. And then number two, find your niche. You know, find your spot. Find what is God, and ask God. I mean, don't do it all on your own, I guess.
Yeah.
Pray about it. You know,
Yeah,
God,
absolutely.
if you don't know what the task is that God's given you, then beg him to reveal it to you. And that's something that I believe God will definitely be faithful and give you the answer to that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Rob. There's so much in there to contemplate. I love that you brought out the idea of experience. I remember the fairly well-known minister who said several years ago, the things that we experience, those things, God doesn't waste. The way he said it is, God never wastes a hurt, and often your deepest ministry will arise out of your deepest hurt. Or your most impactful ministry will arise out of your deepest hurt, because God takes those places where we've been wounded and shaped, the experiences that we've had. Abilities emerge sometimes out of those experiences for the sake of ministry, if we'll allow them to be used by him. And so, I think for those who are listening today, that's sometimes a great thing to contemplate, is not just, where have I been successful, but even where have I failed, or where has maybe someone failed me. I shared, as we were talking offline earlier, the story about connecting, engaging in a counseling relationship. Maybe I have some skills, you've got some skills in counseling, but maybe we don't always have the experiences that someone has gone through. And sometimes connecting someone, if they're okay with that, obviously, with a person who's walked through the same thing. And again, therein comes that teamwork.
Right.
And you see amazing things happen when we take what we have and we use it. We just bring it as an offering before God. Again, I think the verse that you referenced, verse 5 in chapter 3, what after all is Apollos? What is Paul? Only servants through whom you came to believe. And then this is the pivotal piece in that, as the Lord has assigned to each his task. And so, I think that is, the encouragement that you're sharing in two parts, to go and be faithful. Yeah. To go and be faithful, to try to discover what faithfulness looks like. How can you live out your part? God has assigned to each his task. How can you go live out your part in being a disciple who makes disciples as part of a team? Not thinking you have to do it all, but as part of the team, and being faithful to the task that God has assigned you. So fantastic encouragement for all of us. It's again, humbling, but also reassuring to me. Yeah. To know that I'm part of a team. I don't have to do everything. And not just as a staff team, but larger within the small group, within the church, and then within the kingdom. What a great and healthy way of thinking about that. So again, we just want to say thanks for joining us for this week. We really hope that this has been a helpful conversation today, in particular, helpful for me to be a participant in the conversation, so hopefully helpful to you as somebody who's been listening, and certainly hope that for the month as well. Obviously, we do love to hear feedback from you all. Again, give you the email address. It is practicemakesfaithful@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feedbacks, and if you've ever got a question for us, we'd love to take the time to answer that as well. We hope that what we're doing is helping you walk more faithfully with Jesus. So go put into practice the things that will make you more faithful.
Yeah, and let me add, because please join us again next week.
Yes.
As we're diving into a new series.
That's right.
That Paul's going to be talking to us about, called With You Always. With You Always.
Yep.
So we would love to have you for that as well.
Yep, absolutely. Until then, God bless, and we'll see you next week.